as you've described before, this person that's in the 1950s, that's in their 30s, that means they were born in the 20s. That means they then, in their like teenage years, went through the Great Depression. So, boom, that one thing changes their entire paradigm.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
Welcome to Skippy and Doogles Talk Investing. We got a couple great topics for y'all today. Before we get started, please rate, review the podcast. It helps people to find us. Stop right now. Stop what you're doing, because I'm about to ruin the image and the style that you used to.
Please go rate the podcast. Also, a reminder, we're going to talk about this a little this week, Doogles, but I listened to a competitor of ours that had 7 ads during their hour-long podcast, and they were garbage. Like, we don't do that to you. The reason we don't do that to you is because, frankly, I feel like that's dishonest and disrespectful to the client. If we throw some Bitcoin junk or whatever, whoever wants to advertise on our show, that's complete garbage. Anyway, what we do instead is we have premium subscriptions. That's skippydoogles.supercast.com. Really, that just helps support the show. It just says, I think you guys are funny or whatever, or this is good entertainment. Please check that out.
2 topics for y'all today. Topic number 1, there's no free lunch. This is a classic basic, foundational economic principle. No free lunch. What are the trade-offs of some of the everyday topics that come up that we go, yeah, I want that thing, but what the trade-offs be at? We're going to cover a couple things there and then discuss complex thought when it comes to investing / get rid of your rigidity.
You're fired, Doogles. Next week, I'm doing this with a new host. You just got...
No.
You're going to say rigidity up in here?
You stop being so rigid. Okay? You're so rigid in your thoughts. You ready for the first topic?
Yeah, let's go. So you want to talk about tipping? I mean, usually when we talk about tipping, you're telling me that I'm a cheapskate. So I can't wait for this one to go.
Okay. You are a cheapskate. That's separate from tipping. I can tell many a story. I can tell many a story about this, but I'm not going to. So there are 3 topics that I want to talk about within this broader no free lunch domain. And again, the overall take is sometimes we hit up against these quote unquote obstacles in life. And I say quote unquote because for some people they are, for some people they may not be, but you want to treat them as such. And we go, get rid of it, change it. I don't want it anymore. But we got to think about the trade-offs because there's no free lunch. Topic number 1, tipping.
Yeah, so I don't even know where you want to go with this because there's 2 things that are happening with tipping right now. One is it's gotten a little out of control and there's some backlash because people that don't even talk to you, like you go carry out the pizza and they want like a 25% tip. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And 2 is our politicians don't work together, but they passed a bill this week, 100-0, saying tips are exempt from taxes. And this is absolutely ludicrous to me. Wait, where do you want to start with this?
Let's go to the first part of what you were discussing here, is that tipping in this country has gotten so wild, especially, I think, in the last 5 years. You can probably go back further, but in the last 5 years, it has gotten wild. I love the art of tipping. I just want to give you that. I used to, back in the day, I used to go and eat out just so I could tip people because I was a waiter for a number of years. And the feeling that you get when you get that good tip, it's just life-changing. I felt it before, and I like to bestow that upon other people. And like you just said, go get myself a milk because I don't drink coffee. I go to Starbucks, get myself a milk, and they ask him for a 65% tip.
Yeah,
I'm like,
what's a good tip, Doogles? Like when you were going out just to brighten someone's day. Yeah, what are we talking? Like percentage-wise, it doesn't have to be
bad service. Bad service. I'm talking 25%. But I would like to be more in that like 35, 40 plus % range. That's not an everyday thing.
I know, but like what I like, I don't do this often, but when I do it, what I like is like 100% something. Oh, and it's a clear.
That's different. That's a whole different thing.
It's like a little dance. Like I appreciate you. Like, here we go.
Yeah.
I want the person to pick up the bill, look down, turn around and like give it a smile, right? Brighten their
So
day.
what you're talking about are those, if you talk about that moment where I'd say you connect with the individual, you start feeling heart to heart, you know what I'm saying? Front to front, back to back. When you start feeling that way, then I fully agree. And especially when you're like, those are the kind of situations where if I might go out and grab something alone back in the day or something like that, and it's like it comes out to be a $20 bill, drop that 40, I get that. I get that.
Okay.
That's not when you got families and whatnot. Those numbers start adding up real quick. So you know they do. But I do think that like the art of the 25+% tip on a decent bill, I'll say a decently sized bill, feels pretty good. But at the same time, when you go and like you mentioned, when you haven't even made eye contact with the individual, and really what you're doing is tipping a machine, and the machine has, I joked about the 65% a bit, but that's not the base tip. It is the high end tips sometimes look like that. And they start to put them in reverse order. So it's like, do you want to do 65%, 30%, or 15%? And they understand how human psychology works. So you anchor them on the 65%. And you're like, crap, am I the person that leaves the 15%? I know this person behind me can probably see what I'm leaving. Now they're judging me. It's a whole thing. The reason I'm bringing this up, though, can I revert this back to why no free lunch?
Well, yeah, but let me drop some facts. I want to get in with some facts at some point. So, the average cost of a burger and a soda, it costs 10 major cities, $19. Okay.
Yep.
And so they estimate, this article estimates that over the course of a year, Gen Z eating out 3 times a week and tipping 25% would cost $741 out of their average salary, which is $40K. The larger point here, that's just one example, and it tends to focus on Gen Z. But the larger point here is like, this is becoming a decent line item on the personal P&L. And where you want to go, I think, is there's trade-offs to that, because it's just a different way to compensate folks. And it impacts the individuals that are eating out and being forced to tip, as well as the companies that employ those individuals, right?
That's right. As I mentioned, I worked in a restaurant for a number of years. The base salary, if you want to call it that, the base salary for my paycheck was $2.13 an hour. That was the compensation. What that equaled every 2 weeks, when the paycheck came out and you deducted city taxes and state taxes and federal taxes and all that stuff, was $0. So in the end, the net income to me that came from my employer every 2 weeks was $0. That means that what was left for tips is my actual compensation. When you look at that equation, what that means is like what you just described, that 25%, the customer is paying for my salary, is paying for everything, my rent, all that stuff is being paid for by the customer. So the trade-off in this case is, do we want companies, in cases like this, do we want companies to pay their employees a living wage, or do we want customers to pay their employees a living wage? And the system that we've set up today, that we've all implicitly accepted, is that customers are going to be the ones in those cases. I'm talking about bartenders, restaurant workers, customers are the ones that are paying. So if we want to chip chop this whole system away, that's a shift back to companies. That's the trade-off. I don't know that people know that. I don't know that people know that either.
No, I hadn't thought about it that way. And what's so interesting is my time in the service business was delivering pizzas, and I was very quickly asked to manage the store, in which case I did the math, which is basically your math, and said, no, as a delivery driver, I make more money than the store manager. Like, am I an idiot?
Yeah.
So that's funny. I never had a job making the 213, that perspective is helpful for me. I don't know. I can't answer those questions. I mean, you've got me stumped.
Yeah.
Here's what I wanted to say about the tax policy is,
please.
I think that talking point says, oh, well, so these people are paying rent with their tips, so why should we tax that? Like, let's do a solid. Like, literally, there's a reason it passes 100-1, because the optics here are great. The economist in me effectively says, like, if you're trying to increase the income of a certain type of employee, do it across the board. Don't do it for people that happen to work in restaurants. Do it for delivery drivers too, and anyone, like just say above this or below this salary or whatever, or in this range, you cut taxes across the board. That seems more fair to me, is all I'm saying.
You kind of have to go there, but then also the overall tipping culture would have to be evaluated because tips are connected to so many different industries now. I think it used to be, I can't go back in my Wayback Machine, but I think it used to be pretty constrained to, let's call it bartenders, waitresses, that serve that kind of service industry. And now that everybody gets tips, but because there's so many different people that get tips, I don't know if you can do it completely across the board because not everyone lives off of those tips in the same way. That's not 100%.
No, but you could just say, like, the thought process behind taxes on tips, I think is, hey, these people usually make less than $80,000 a year. I don't know what the number is.
Yep. Whatever.
So then if the goal is to actually allow take-home pay for people in that income subset to increase, you just do it across the board. You just say anyone that makes less than this gets a tax break. That's not what they said. They said, I want my local bartender, I want their take-home pay to increase, but I don't care about my local package handler. Like, I'm just throwing out some random thing that doesn't get tips. I don't think that's the best way to do it.
I think it's a noble take. Let's move on. Topic number 2 under this first topic of no free lunch, student loan forgiveness. I've seen you rant around this topic. I don't know if we've gone directly into this topic, but you've talked about the cost of education before and the subsidizing of that education by the government and how that increases prices, et cetera, et cetera. Student loan forgiveness is kind of a downstream potential solution for that upstream problem, is one way to look at it. But what I want to pose is this. So you've got, in the trade-off category, you have people that have gone to school. They've been paying these increased tuition rates that have come because of what we just discussed before. They come out the other side. Maybe the jobs that they're getting are not fit to be able to pay back some of those loans. They're being hampered down. Cost of living has gone up. And we're like, oh, well, we can forgive those loans because 90+% of student loans are held by the government, not by the private loan folks. So we can forgive those loans, try and give some breaks to the everyday Americans. Then you have the other side, which is I went to school. I paid those high tuition rates. I got my job. It was a struggle, but I paid off that debt.
I paid those loans, yeah.
I paid those loans. So me as a taxpayer, why am I paying for somebody else's loans? Because in the end, who pays? Taxpayers are going to be paying for this. What do you think?
Well, first of all, our budget is so disconnected from reality at the federal level that none of it works as simply as you'd like. I'm going to give you an example here. Let's go back to burgers. I own a burger shop. It cost me $5 to make the burger. I should sell the burger for $10. What we've done with higher ed is give away free burger coupons that the debt cannot be relinquished in bankruptcy, right? We've said these burgers are so important that you can come get all the burger coupons you want. So that burger sells for 20 or $30, even though it only should sell for 10, simply because the owner of the burger machine is like, there's a market out here to sell this for $30. By all means. So he's doing the smart thing. Then everyone buys these $30 burgers because they see peer pressure of their friends buying $30 burgers. And then they get on the backside and they're like, it's dinner time and I'm still kind of hungry. But I just spent $30 on this thing that didn't fill me up. And now you're saying on the back end, oh, you know what we should do? We should forgive $20 of that $30 burger coupon to get back to the fair market price. Everything here is so broken. That's all I'm trying to illustrate. This is stupid. The first thing we should do tomorrow is make sure that education debt can be relinquished, whatever the right term is, in personal bankruptcy. As soon as you do that, the cost of education comes down significantly because the supply and demand equation changes. So I don't know. This is kind of like talking about healthcare for me. Like, it's so broken on all sides that it's just stupid. Is student loan forgiveness maybe the right approach? I don't know. It's not fair. It's not fair to anyone. The current system's not fair either. Here's the other thing I'll say. I have a lot of friends and family making the college decision right now, and the range of prices varies so greatly. But I plead with you listeners, do not treat this like a classic value investment in a way. The quality of education varies even more than the range of those prices. Do not think, oh, I should go pick the lowest cost solution that my future student gets into. No. That's not how this works. There are degree factories out there that have no credibility in the workplace. So, sorry, mini rant there. I don't know. You tell me what you think about student loan forgiveness. I just think the whole system's broken.
So the whole system is broken. I cannot debate that. The entire system is broken. I can easily see both sides of that argument. I think I've said this before. I also think that the "it's not fair to me" argument is one in the U.S. that we just need to get over, because there's so many different things that I could bring that argument up to other people about, where this isn't fair. I don't know. Capitalism isn't fair.
No,
our
I'm
system
with you
is built.
there. I mean, I could go through the federal government and probably only find 20% of spending or some small number that I actually support. And the rest of those trillions of dollars are not fair to me.
Exactly.
My voting for people that I think have some common sense hasn't worked out too great there either. Yeah. So, yes, I'm with you. Get over that.
I generally think this is an agreement with what you're saying. I would generally say that the fact that we need to have student loan forgiveness as a potential solution is just a symptom of the larger problem, and go fix the larger problem. That does not mean that we shouldn't have student loan forgiveness in the meantime. And I think it's not about education per se. I think this is a case, maybe you could even tie it back to the last conversation we had around tipping, where I think we need to say there's a class or multiple classes of people in the country that if we do not free up, the whole system may come down. Maybe. And let's figure out what that looks like. And the student loan forgiveness may be one way. It could be tipping exemption or under certain income exemption another way. Maybe these things are temporary. But in reality, we've locked ourselves up so much economically in the country that some things do need to change. And maybe student loan forgiveness is something, or maybe it's not.
Did you hear the Bill Aikman 3-minute clip on Harvard this week?
No.
I'll try and summarize it really quick. It's simply about the financials.
Okay.
He says the endowment is currently marked at a value of $53 billion, but 85% of that is private equity, and the private equity hasn't been marked since in at least 4 years. He thinks that the private equity is going to take a 40% haircut. He thinks when you take a 40% haircut, the value of that endowment might be somewhere in the $30 billion rather than the $50 billion, right?
Yep.
There's two other fundraising engines for an institution like Harvard. There's grants from the federal government, which are under threat at the moment because of a lot of politics. We won't even touch that. And there's raising from your alumni. And there's debt. There's debt issuance, right?
Of course, yeah.
The alumni isn't happy to write checks right now because there's just so much turmoil around the things, and they don't feel like they're getting a good return on their investment necessarily. Because the value of the endowment is very likely to come down, and Harvard is issuing debt. They just issued $750 million to try and handle the shortfall. So his larger point, which I find incredibly interesting, and I'm not sure if it's perfectly factual or not, is just that they're under a ridiculous amount of pressure right now to just run their standard operating budget, because their three main fundraising engines are all likely to trend down.
Yeah. That's right. And this is, I think that is a fascinating conversation. I'm not educated enough right now to have, but it does fit into this broader topic of who pays. I'm going to create an illustrative scenario here that I think is probably not too far from reality. But again, I have not looked at enough of the facts to be able to talk to it in detail. When you look at big research organizations like Harvard, it is quite difficult to know what research they are doing and how that impacts other parts of the economy, what kind of technology transfer that might impact. When I say technology transfer, I mean inventions that they have that are then put into the private sector through technology transfer. It's hard to know what we're impacting. What kind of science goes into disease, like prevention or cure, right? There's so much you don't know. And so in these scenarios, where something may sound like Harvard has been doing X and X is not good, therefore let's restrict funds, whatever it might be for Harvard, it might be easy to go that's the privileged elite. Kill that. I don't like that. But we don't know all the tributaries. that come out of it. And so I bring that up because when you mention their everyday operations, I think everyday operations is the classroom stuff, but also in big research universities, it's also all the downstream things that flow into the everyday populace that are unseen, generally speaking. And it's scary, honestly, to me, because I don't know. It's scary because I don't know.
Yeah, and it can't be known. The quick example there's some story about 5 years ago, the Berkeley PhD machine learning or LLM research program has created like 7 founders in AI that currently run companies worth how many trillions of dollars. You're right. There's real ramifications that tie to the economy that are there's so much gray area there that no one really knows how it all ties together. And no one knows if the university funding is cut off, if that will appear in the private sector somewhere. I mean, that's what the Treasury Secretary would tell you, but it hasn't happened in the recent past there.
Yeah, we don't know.
Anything else you want to hit here before we talk about just complexity of thought?
No. Thank you for going down the no free lunch, who pays for this road with me. Let's transition.
Right. So this is actually really related. You and I both consumed like some, I don't know how to say it. I don't want to throw these people under the bus.
Oh, it's a podcast.
We listened to investors this week that just regurgitated the same boring quotes from the usual suspects, all people I respect. So this is not about those people, but Buffett and Munger and Howard Marks and whatever. And we have been guilty of doing that on the show. But I want to make things just crystal clear. When you're dealing with investors that have 50-year track records and navigated through times of wars and inflation spikes and debt crises and oil shortages and everything else, and you read through their reports or their books or their reviews, you can effectively find them arguing for anything at any time. Right? Yeah. Let me give an example. Buffett bought Coca-Cola. He made a killing on it. It was so great. Buffett was on the board of Coca-Cola in the late 90s. What no one really knows is Buffett wanted to sell Coca-Cola because it was overvalued and it was a bad business for a short period of time. He could not sell Coca-Cola because of the optics of him being on the board. So don't go back to his, early 90s shareholder letter and be like, this is why Buffett said Coke is such a good business and this is why he held on to it for 50 years. It's so much more complex than that. Everything is. And what I've seen happen recently is people just kind of regurgitate this wisdom, not understanding that 2025 is a very unique period of time that requires an incredible amount of critical thought. I'll give you a personal example here that I hope doesn't spoil things. I spent 25 years of my investing career being like, I will never buy gold. Gold is the stupidest asset ever. There's no cash flows. There's nothing. If a gold meteor hits the earth tomorrow, then the price of gold gets cut in half because there's more supply of gold. Like all this,
and we're all dead.
You know what gold has done in 2025? It's up like 27%.
Yeah.
You know why gold has been a good? I put investments in quotes because I still think it's it's not an investment for me. But someone that's critically thinking could go, oh wait, the U.S. administration, which happens to have the reserve currency of the world, is alienating all our closest allies and is working hard to devalue our currency. You know what's a great investment? The central currency that is not tied, the central currency that's been around for thousands of years that is not tied to a government. You know what that happens to be at this time? It's gold. This is simply an illustrative point to say, like, always have to be working so hard mentally. I think this is why you and I like investing, because it's not 1970. It's not 1930. It's 2025. This is a unique set of situations for today's time. So just fired up about it, Doogles.
Yeah, I like that. And it relates to some of the listener mail that we got maybe about a month or two ago that asked the question around, would you invest or not invest in a security based on political or moral beliefs? Some version of that. And I think that just like the conversation we had when that was asked, the answer around that is like, all these things shift so much. It's hard to give a straight yes or no. Because you could say, let's tackle the example that we discussed at that time, because I think I said about a month or so ago, I think this might have been like 3 months ago. I think it might have been that long ago. And we discussed Tesla and Elon. It's like, with Elon doing all these things up in Doge, he could be pissing people off. And you're like, oh, well, no, I would never touch Tesla because look at dirty Elon and I'm just yelling out, ranting about that, right? Not really saying that. In the government. Now Elon's not in Doge and he's like back in Tesla. And if this same scenario were 3 months ago, you wouldn't even have seen him do that. What does he believe now? I don't know. Elon came out and said, I'm not going to put as much money into political campaigns anymore. So what are his beliefs? I don't know. These things are just not quite as black and white. And to your point, it does tie back to that last conversation because that's also not simple. The high level narrative does not touch all the complexity that comes down inside these systems.
I think that's a really good example. I mean, but for me, it's easier to give personal examples. The other thing that one of my investing heroes is Benjamin Graham, right? And Benjamin Graham very clearly in his most famous book, The Intelligent Investor, recommends that you always own bonds and you always own U.S. government bonds because of their safety.
Yep.
Well, U.S. government bonds just got downgraded. And also I pulled up the graph right now. In July of 2020, 30-year U.S. government bonds were trading at like 1.2%, right? That's when I was evaluating my portfolio and saying, no, this is not a good time to U.S. government.
Yeah.
The only thing they can do is drop in value. And you know what they've done? Over the past 12 months, they've dropped in value significantly. You know what they've done over the last 3 years? They've dropped in value significantly as rates went from 1.2% to 5%. So that teaching that was really valid in the 50s and 60s and maybe even the 70s was not valid in 2020. The point remains the same. It's just like if you just try and write your investing principles on stone tablets, you're going to lose a lot of money.
I'm probably going to be contradictory in this statement, but unintentionally, but I think I don't know how I cannot be. There's nothing that I would never invest in or the opposite. And the reason I think I just said an absolute in a case where I'm saying I won't do anything absolutely. So I think that's why I think it might be contradictory. But the point is, to what you just described, it's impossible to know the macro or micro factors that are going to come into play. It's impossible to know my own personal situation that's going to come into play and what strategies are going to have to be valuable at that given point in time. You go back to the 1950s. So if somebody sitting in the 1950s, let's say that they're in their 30s at that point and thinking about investing, as you've described before, this person that's in the 1950s, that's in their 30s, that means they were born in the 20s. That means they then, in their like teenage years, went through the Great Depression. So boom, that one thing changes their entire paradigm. Then you get the 1950s, which is right after World War II, where the entire world is bombed except for the U.S. At that point in time, you're basically saying, okay, so I'm sitting in a place where we just had a major, major war. There's a lot of cheapness everywhere because the world has been decimated. The U.S. is in an obvious global superpower place. That doesn't mean you never know what the future is going to look like. But at that point in time, that's an easy story to tell. And I also have a mentality where I go, I have to be conservative. If you put all that stuff together, the bullet points that you would put down are quite different than somebody who was born in the 1990s and is now in their 30s in the 2020s. In the 1990s, you have a boom in internet. Things are up and to the right. You had a huge bust that then came back, had another huge bust that then came back, and you go, it always comes back. So your macro is completely different than the person in the Great Depression that's conservative. Now you're like, buy every dip. Something goes down 2%, buying opportunity. It's a completely different mentality.
Yeah. Well, and you have the rest of the world sending their money to the U.S. stock market and leverage exploding. And it hasn't blown up yet. So buy every dip and roll with your triple levered QQQ. That's not investment advice, by the way. I think that's an incredibly dumb idea. But but
you get the mentality.
We may shoot us listener mail on this if it's interesting. skippydoogles@gmail.com. We may cover it in more depth or go through specific examples that's on your mind. I just felt it important to say this week. You can't put anything on autopilot because the world's too complex.
No, constant evaluation.
Same with your career, same with your friend group, like all these things. You have to be looking at this and making decisions in real time with the information you have available.
This might be terrible career advice, but I believe it. When I've had people that have reported to me in jobs and they're like, I'm nervous to talk about this, but like I'm thinking of maybe moving on to somewhere else. Like I took an interview. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
What did they say? Right? Because just like in general relationships, if you stick around and work here, I want you to be choosing it. I want it to be an active decision. And so if you don't know your value externally, therefore your value internally, and it's the same to go back to, you just related it to the career space, to go back to investing. I look at individual securities on a regular basis, especially this year. I've been looking at, I don't know what the level of my overall portfolio is this year, but I am looking at the securities that are in it and thinking much more about those securities and where they fit into the macro. That doesn't mean action will be taken or not, but it's just kind of a constant, like, does this make sense for what Doogles needs in this current environment? And when would it make sense, when it would not make sense, and just thinking about it. It's dynamic.
100%. Speaking of your career example, I think I've had a few employees get placed somewhere else, and I've been happier for them than they have.
Yeah.
Even though it makes my life worse. Yeah. All right. That's it, y'all.
Right.
Again, reviews are helpful. We're everywhere. If you're trying to find us on Instagram, I think we're hard to find. It's just Skippy Doogles. It's not or it's not Skippy and Doogles or
just
anything.
Skippy Doogles.
Skippy Doogles. So we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.